Hey, what's good, self-direct investors? I hope you're all doing great, and I want to welcome you back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Jordan. I'm the mind behind Make More Capital, and today we're coming at you with this week in cannabis news from May 24th to the 30th. So before we jump in, if you enjoy this video or you learn something, please just leave a like on it as it really helps out my channel. And then of course, if you want to learn how to take advantage of this generational investment opportunity, subscribe below so that you don't miss any future videos. And then there's plenty of content for you to go back, rewatch, and educate yourself with, as I've tried to put all the news and facts in one place so that you can watch how the industry's evolved over time, identify some top companies that you keep seeing pop up, and take advantage whenever you feel ready. So although we did not get the bill that Schumer has promised us, something is better than nothing, and we did get the MORE Act reintroduced in the House, which is a great step, and it just pushes Schumer's catalyst even further into the future as the trends start to change in our direction and we see more green. So the bill to federally legalize cannabis reintroduced in Congress as Senate prepares separate measure. So, a bill to federally legalize cannabis and promote social equity in the industry was reintroduced in the House on Friday. The legislation, sponsored by Judiciary Committee Chairman Gerald Nadler, was filed with a number of changes compared to the version that was approved by the chamber last year. The bill, which would remove cannabis from the Controlled Substances Act, allow people with cannabis convictions to have their records expunged, and create a federal tax on cannabis, with the revenue going to support community reinvestments and other programs, comes as Senate leadership is also, at the same time, preparing to introduce a separate reform proposal with similar objectives. So I wanted to highlight this main tweet, just sums it up. The MORE Act will decriminalize cannabis at the federal level, which Biden is okay with, and that seems to be the plan, at least decriminalize medical cannabis at the federal level, so that can go, or that can become federally legal, and then states can decide on their own adult use laws, reassess cannabis convictions, and invest in local communities, which is very important. So, and then basically after announcing this is what we've gotten for the long weekend, and then of course, meanwhile, Senate leadership is preparing to file legalization legislation that's anticipated to include similar social equity components, which will be reintroduced very soon. Now, I'm sure you're tired of hearing me say that, so I'm not going to cover much more. Just going to present this because we did get something on Friday, which is what we needed, which is great to see. Then this is a tweet actually in the subreddit from Cannabis MSOs, where Todd Harrison is expecting Chuck Schumer's cannabis plan in this upcoming week. He says an ever so slight vibration on the whisper sphere seems to be sensing Senator Chuck Schumer will finally share his long-awaited cannabis plan next week. I can neither confirm nor deny this, but I'm sure I'll catch shit for sharing it either way, and I probably will for sharing this. Now, this was a tweet, and I went back to find it, and I don't know if it's there anymore, so here's the thing. Apparently, Congress is, or the Senate is off from Memorial Day, which is Monday, until June 7th, so it's possible he might be outlining something. But, you know, if it doesn't come next week, it'll likely come the week after that. Main thing, and I see this as a good thing, is the main catalyst we've been looking for has actually just been pushed back, and we've gotten, you know, a smaller but just as good catalyst to tide us over until then. So just wanted to share this. Don't shoot the messenger. I'm just sharing what Todd heard, and Todd does have some friends in the investor sphere, a lot more than I do. But keep in mind, Todd Harrison is a long-term investor. He's not a short-term day trader, so if you're anticipating some short-term results, he's not the guy to listen to. You definitely want to take his advice, or at least listen to what he has to say, if you can hold out and play the long game in this cannabis industry. Now, onto Tom Angle. The Safe Banking Act now has 38 co-sponsors in the Senate, with Senator Chris Coons, described by New York Times this week as one of President Biden's closest confidants in Congress, signing on to the cannabis banking bill. So that's great news. At least the SAFE is getting more co-sponsors, and ideally, this would be very beneficial for the industry if Schumer would just swallow his pride and get this passed sooner than later. But again, he knows his Senate better than we do, and we've got to trust that he knows what he's doing. And I know that's not easy, but we've got to do it, especially it's going to make us money in time and keep our money invested in the right companies. Now, coming from Forbes too, this is great to see. Cannabis sales will be unprecedented thanks to hot vax summer. So we're just going to go through this and highlight some of the demand we're anticipating. On Wednesday, Ben Kovler, founder and CEO of Green Thumb Industries, held a ribbon cutting after expanding capacity at GTI's 250,000 square foot production facility in Oglesby, Illinois, where his company grows high-end cannabis flower, produces pre-rolled joints, manufactures THC-infused edibles, and runs a cannabis beverage line. Right before Memorial Day weekend, as COVID-19 restrictions around the country's ease and nearly half of Americans are now vaccinated, Kovler says GTI is focused on its goal to produce as much product as possible to keep up with what will be a summer-long surge of demand. The roaring 20s is on, says Kovler. It's unprecedented demand that we're making supply nothing fancy from us. Now, I won't go through this because we've seen this many times. Last year, Americans bought $17.5 billion worth of cannabis. But what does the data tell us that we can project for, a forward-looking outlook? According to a new report published by BDSA, a cannabis sales tracking and analytics firm, dispensaries across the U.S. will see blockbuster sales during Memorial Day weekend, which will be the start to a sales record-breaking summer. In mature markets like Colorado, which launched legal sales in 2014, holiday sales are expected to jump 25% over last year and more than 30% in newer adult use markets like Illinois, BDSA says. We're expecting this weekend to kick off an unprecedented summer of cannabis sales across markets, says Jessica Lucas, a senior vice president at BDSA. We're going to see increased consumption as more people are vaccinated and ready to have a good time. And then the combination of the pandemic and the addition of new legal state cannabis markets created a shift in America. More Americans use cannabis more frequently. It's becoming a new habit, says Lucas. Already more people across the U.S. are consuming cannabis this year than in 2020. About 43% of Americans in states where adult use is legal are now consuming cannabis, up from 36% last year, BDSA data shows. In states like California, 45% of residents use cannabis, up from 33% in 2020. Similar trends can be seen in Massachusetts, Florida, and other states with legal programs. So, and just wanted to highlight this CEO, Khalid Naim, the CEO and co-founder of OnFleet, a San Francisco-based delivery management software company that powers tens of thousands of cannabis deliveries every day, says order volume has not softened. I expect this to be the biggest summer yet for cannabis and other segments like alcohol, says Naim. Our volume continues to grow. May will be our biggest month ever. And Naim says consumer adoption of delivery surged during the pandemic, and he now expects up to 90% of that new business to remain. That's wild. People are now used to the convenience of delivery, says cannabis order volume is already up 25% to 30% this year over 2020. So it's good that they're preparing, and think about it coming from Ben, the CEO. It's not a crazy summer inside GTI. For us, it's a summer of execution. It's an unsexy story, but ultimately that's how you become successful in business. You supply the demand, especially when everyone else is having fun, having a good time. When you're on the ground putting in the work and supplying that demand, that's when you get rewarded. So on to some news from legislative changes. Biden budget keeps medical cannabis protections, but would block DC from legalizing recreational sales, which is just so silly at this point. Completely contradicts the reality in America and what the people want, but that's what you get when you kind of look and when you got tunnel vision. President Joe Biden wants to maintain long-standing policy that's protected state medical cannabis laws from Justice Department, thank goodness, interference as part of his fiscal year 2022 budget proposal. A notable administration decision given that previous presidents from both parties have called for its elimination in their annual plan. So this is actually great. He's at least saying, look, we got to protect the medical aspect of it. Let's make sure that's accounted for in the budget. But Biden wants to continue to block Washington, D.C. from using its own tax dollars to legalize adult use cannabis sales, declining to recommend that current language barring such activity be eliminated. The budget approach is raising questions about whether the president is drawing the line in the sand by supporting medical cannabis states but denying D.C. its right to implement sales, as the mayor and local legislators want to do. If so, it would reflect his overall cannabis policy position: yes to medical cannabis, no to recreational cannabis. But what makes this a touchy subject is that it's seriously concerning that the will of District of Columbia residents who voted to legalize cannabis years ago continues to be ignored, despite immense support in the city. Queen Adesuyi, policy manager for the Drug Policy Alliance's Office of National Affairs, told Marijuana Moment, adding that local officials should be allowed to deliver on the promises of equity and justice for those disproportionately impacted by racially biased enforcement of cannabis laws in the district, especially because a large portion of the population in DC has been negatively affected by the war on drugs. And you think if Biden was the one that, put those laws into effect that negatively impacted them, come on, you want to help the people that you're now serving. On to some good news, though. Youth cannabis use remains stable after states started enacting legislation, federal reports find. So a new federal report is again challenging the prohibitionist narrative that state-level cannabis legalization leads to increased youth use. Gotta love all this new data that's coming out. This time, the U.S. Department of Education's National Center for Education Statistics analyzed youth surveys of high school students from 2009 to 2019, concluding that there's been no measurable difference in the percentage of those in grades 9 to 12 who reported consuming cannabis at least once in the past 30 days. The report, which relies on data from the Youth Risk Behavior Surveillance System, also found that access remained stable during that time period, with no statistically significant changes in the percentage of youth who say that they've been offered, sold, or gifted illegal drugs on school grounds in the previous 30 days. What makes this report notable is the timeline. Cannabis reform opponents frequently argue that enacting adult use legalization in states spur more underage people to use cannabis. There were no recreational markets in 2009, and that year 21% of high school students reported past 30-day use. The first legal sales launched in Colorado in 2014, and 5 years after that, 22% of the teens said they'd recently used cannabis. So if you can take a look, legalization efforts in the US only started in 2014, and numbers have just not made any sort of change. It doesn't make a difference. So that's great. This shows us what we need to know and what we've been saying for a very long time, at least cannabis activists, that it makes no difference. Not that it all of a sudden causes teens to start consuming cannabis. The highest percentage of reported past 30-day use in this analysis actually occurred in 2011, again, before any states legalized. So the great news, or the great thing to add, is that this is supported by numerous studies now and reports on the issue, including an earlier analysis of the same survey that was conducted by the Centers of Disease Control and Prevention. The agency found that cannabis consumption among high school students declined during the peak years of state legal recreational cannabis legalization. There was no change in the rate of current cannabis use among high school students from 2009 to 2019, the survey found. When analyzed using a quadratic change model, however, lifetime cannabis consumption decreased during that period. On top of a federally funded Monitoring the Future report released late last year, found that cannabis consumption among adolescents did not significantly change in any of the 3 grades for lifetime use, past 12-month use, past 30-day use, and daily use from 2019 to 2020. And then another one. So it's good that we've got more and more data now telling us, the objective truth. Another study released by Colorado officials last year showed that youth cannabis consumption in the state has not changed since legalization in 2012, or significantly changed since legalization in 2012, though methods of consumption are diversifying. So it's positive that we've got more evidence to back up the fact that this is time to get this done and end prohibition. On to some developments out of California and Nevada as lawmakers advance cannabis social consumption lounge bills, which is again sort of just breaking into new territory for this industry, as the Nevada Assembly on Thursday approved a bill to legalize cannabis consumption lounges, and a California bill that would allow local jurisdictions to permit licensed cannabis lounges to sell non-cannabis foods and drinks also cleared the state's assembly. Both pieces of legislation now head to the Senate in their respective states, but I think this is important because it's normalizing the idea how alcohol is legal, you can go to bars and consume alcohol. Once we legalize cannabis, why would you not be able to go to a consumption lounge and consume it with, like-minded people who'd rather choose cannabis over alcohol? It just normalizes it as well and reduces the stigma. In Nevada, the measure from Assemblyman Steve Yeager cleared the chamber in a 29-12 vote. It would create 2 new licensing categories for cannabis businesses in the state. One would be for retail cannabis consumption lounges, and the other for an independent cannabis consumption lounge. Existing retailers could apply for the former license and sell products that could be consumed on-site by adults 21 and older. Independent lounges would not be permitted to sell cannabis on their own, but would need to have cannabis products delivered to consumers from another source. That said, independent licenses could submit a request to regulators to sell cannabis that they produce or to enter into a contract with an adult use retailer to sell their products. And the state's Cannabis Compliance Board would be responsible for creating regulations for on-site facilities and setting fees for license applicants. Businesses that qualify as social equity applicants would have a fee reduced to give them a bit of a leg up. And if we jump over to California, the Assembly approved legislation on Thursday that was sponsored by Assemblyman Richard Bloom on behalf of the City of West Hollywood that would make a more nuanced change to the state's policy of consumption lounges. While social use sites are lawful under California's recreational cannabis program, selling non-cannabis foods and drinks at such establishments is currently prohibited. While West Hollywood approves a local ordinance in 2017 that allowed a first-of-its-kind retailer to open, serving both cannabis and non-infused foods, it operates in a gray area under emergency regulations. So this would basically just allow them to, sell water or any sort of beverages or food to people consuming cannabis, which definitely makes sense. That's something we should definitely allow. Now on to Colorado, where the first sort of regulation bill of its kind has overwhelmingly passed in the Colorado House. So let's see what this is about and what the reason for it is. The Colorado House of Representatives passed the state's most substantial cannabis regulation policy since legalization on Thursday, intending to crack down on youth access to high-potency THC products and tighten rules for the medical cannabis market. Obviously a difficult task, and so we'll see how this bill aims to actually do that. HB 21-1317 passed overwhelmingly 56-8 and moves on to the state Senate, where it is also expected to pass. The bill is a product of months of negotiation led by House Speaker Alec Garnett and calls for the Colorado School of Public Health to analyze existing research related to the physical and mental health effects of high-potency THC cannabis and concentrates. The analysis could inform new restrictions in the coming years. The measure also requires medical and recreational dispensaries to package products with explicit guidance for consumers on serving size, because people listen to the serving recommendation on wine bottles anyways, requires a real-time database to enforce long-standing state laws on daily purchase limits, and contains several provisions designed to make the medical cannabis doctor-patient relationship more official so that it is not easy for people ages 18 to 20 to obtain cards. Some of the few House members who did criticize the bill argued data collection would lead to a discrimination against consumers, as well as a slippery slope towards a fresh round of prohibitionist lawmaking. Garnett disagreed, saying on the House floor just before the vote that he supports making sure we all understand where this market has gone, how this high-potency market has expanded. I just want to make sure that if there is any impact on the developing brain, then we have public health research. We have waited too long to get to this point. Well, at this point, we don't even really understand how the brain works, so we're not going to get really good developing brain research on the effects of cannabis very soon, but I think it is great that they do want to make sure that, we don't go too far in one direction and try to get some sort of feedback. Because if we've learned anything over this past year, it's that people don't like being told what to do, and if you give politicians a bit of an inch, they are going to try and take that power as far as they can. So what do you think about this? Let me know in the comments, but truthfully, hopefully in time, this does just provide us with more positive data that's going to be better for everyone and tell us more about what we want to know. On to Illinois, the House approves cannabis equity licensing bill. So this is a big step as legislation revamping the state's system for awarding cannabis dispensary licenses passed the House on Tuesday. The measure is meant to address shortcomings in the 2019 Cannabis Regulation and Tax Act, specifically in regard to a license lottery that was delayed by the pandemic, controversy, and legal disputes for over a year. Amendments to House Bill 1443, sponsored by Chicago Democratic Representative LaShawn Ford, would create 2 new cannabis dispensary lotteries offering 55 licenses each, while addressing lingering concerns regarding the original 75 licenses established by the 2019 law. The 75 licenses initially set by the 2019 law were supposed to be granted by May 2020, but were sidelined by the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic. What can you do? They were later delayed again following the backlash over how applicants for the licenses were scored, and pushed back a third time following lawsuits against the state by the finalists in the initial lottery after Governor J.B. Pritzker announced applications that did not meet the cut could be edited and rescored. And so originally the process was intended to award licenses in order of applicant scores, with tiebreaker lotteries for applicants who received the same score. However, after just 21 of more than 900 applicants received a perfect score to become eligible for the lottery, a hold was placed on the lottery system, likely because of COVID, so that seems to be a valid enough reason. But under Ford's legislation, the first new batch of 55 licenses would be offered through a qualifying applicant lottery, which would only be open to applicants who scored 85% or higher on submissions for the first 75 licenses. This would provide a chance at dispensary licenses to firms who did not receive a perfect score and were excluded from the initial 75 license lottery, and firms who did qualify for the initial tiebreaker lottery but have not hit the 10 license cap for applicants. The second new batch of 55 licenses would be offered through a social equity justice involved lottery. Those eligible must have scored 85% or higher on their submission and must also qualify as a social equity applicant. That means 51% of the firm's ownership must be someone who has lived in an area impacted by the war on drugs for 10 years, have been arrested or convicted of cannabis crime eligible for expungement, or be a member of a family impacted by the war on drugs. Another lottery of 5 licenses for medical cannabis dispensaries would also be open to applicants who are eligible for the social equity or qualifying lottery. As a state that values making our laws reflective of our diverse communities, we must ensure that social justice is at the center of everything we do, Pritzker said in a statement praising the passage of the bill on Tuesday. Instead of allowing the wealthy few to maintain control of this new industry, let's give people in areas that have been left behind a real opportunity to start a local business that is owned and operated by members of the community, he said. That's huge. Got to get behind that. HB 1443 now heads to the Senate, where the General Assembly has until Monday's legislative deadline to pass it with a simple majority. So hopefully they can get that done tomorrow, even though it's a holiday. Now on to some good positive headlines out of U.S. Publications. How to invest in cannabis, as if they're telling you that the time is now. Interest in buying cannabis stocks continues to rise, and we're just going to scroll down to the main thing because I've talked about this over and over, and you'll be able to pause or grab this below. But cannabis stocks are a bargain, and this refers to U.S. cannabis companies, not the Canadian ones, that investors should consider adding to their portfolios. Include Curaleaf Holdings, Cresco Labs, Green Thumb Industries, TerraSend, and Trulieve Cannabis Corp, according to Jason Spadafora and Tim Seymour. You want to be long in tier 1 companies such as Curaleaf, Green Thumb, and Trulieve, Spadafora says, between now and early August, you can take a position in the space because when the liquidity comes back, it will catch people off guard. The one thing we've seen time and time again with cannabis is that when the volume does come back, it is a moonshot. The price appreciation is rapid. The cannabis companies continue to attract customers and generate sales, he says. Weed stocks are cheaper now, and where else are you going to find the growth? Spadafora says, nothing has changed from January until now. So if you want to read about Curaleaf, you can pause and read here. If you want to read about Cresco Labs, pause and check a little snippet, Green Thumb Industries, or TerraSend. But I would also recommend going back and at least watching the videos I've made highlighting these companies' earnings, as I've gone through all that, but really just reiterates what I've been saying for the last few months. So if you've been buying the dip, good on you. But I just want to show you the contradiction that we do see out of bad leadership. Meet the anti-legalization GOP congresswoman cashing in on cannabis stock. It brings into question her credibility as a lawmaker, one congressional ethics expert told Salon. And yeah, I mean, looking into this woman's eyes, it's like staring into the face of death. Very intimidating, but we're going to find out what she's done. Representative Virginia Foxx, a North Carolina Republican with an influential post in the House Committee on Oversight and Reform, has spent her congressional career advocating against the legalization of cannabis, while also loading up on hundreds of thousands of dollars in cannabis industry stocks ahead of crucial votes on key federal decriminalization measures, Salon has learned. Fox, 77, has made at least 6 investments in Altria, and although this does not directly invest in cannabis, why else would you invest in a tobacco industry in this day and age when all of the evidence points to tobacco killing people? So although we have a lot more people smoking in the developed world as tobacco spreads around there, definitely the sentiment towards tobacco is heading in the negative direction. So why would you be investing in Altria unless, because they're on U.S. exchanges, they get exposure? They are a behemoth of a company that has a lot of money and has a lot of cash on their balance sheet to keep them tied for a long time. But at the same time, what is Altria getting into next? And what have they expressed that they want to get into? And well, they've invested in Cronos. British American Tobacco's invested in Organigram, cannabis. So Altria, one of the world's largest tobacco companies and leader in the burgeoning U.S. cannabis industry. Again, I wouldn't say they're a leader. They just have a large equity stake in Cronos, which hopes to use vape technology and incorporate THC and CBD technology in that in time. Since September of last year, according to a financial disclosure report. Say what? The purchases, which have not been previously reported, likely make her the largest holder of cannabis-related stocks in Congress, according to a report from Unusual Whales, a market research firm. It's impossible to say for certain, however, because members of Congress are not required to disclose the exact amounts of their investments, which seems kind of crazy. But her investments raise concern over the ethical problems members of Congress create when trading individual stocks within an industry their actions have the potential to influence. And they make enough money that they don't necessarily need to invest in individual stocks. Their salary is cushy enough for them to live the lifestyle that they want. So obviously a conflict of interest. I'm not sure what else I can really say. Richard Painter, a former White House ethics attorney under President George W. Bush and University of Minnesota law professor, told Salon, it brings into question her credibility 100%. As Rep. Fox's office did not respond to a request for comment, it seems as if all records show she purchased somewhere between $79,000 and $210,000 in Altria stock. It remains unclear whether she's currently holding these investments, although no sales have been reported. But get this. Legalization has been a hot-button issue for the North Carolina representative, whose inflammatory public statements on the matters have been staunchly against several initiatives spearheaded by House Democrats. So this is her tweet. Democrats can't get their minds off pot bills, and they think it's more important than supporting small businesses, safely reopening schools, protecting the livelihoods of Americans. No wonder their majority is shrinking. They're so far removed from reality, except they actually won the Georgia Senate runoff, and that's why now they control the Senate. Where are Republicans fighting to protect? Jobs, she wrote for another, completely oblivious to the fact that, let me just finish this. What are Democrats fighting to protect? Pot, what a joke. Completely oblivious to the fact, well, she's not oblivious. She obviously knows it's the fastest growing industry and it's providing some of the most jobs in the U.S. out of any other. But this comes on December 1st. And if we can see any sort of date, at least 4 of Fox's investments in cannabis industry stock came between the initial MORE Act vote in December and Friday. So she's saying this back then, yet she's buying as many shares in Altria as possible because she's forward thinking. So the hypocrisy could not be clearer, folks. If you are in North Carolina, do not let this woman get voted back in, because this is the exact leadership you do not want to facilitate or allow to continue in any sort of government. On to this tweet from Todd Harrison. Through my lens, there's only one place we can be. So on a good note though, this I wanted to show you. I wondered what this chart was about, so I googled bull market chart. And apparently this chart represents the classic phases of the bull market. A lot of different references down here, but it's very timely, and wanted to share this because where do you think we are? I would say we are in the bear trap. The first sell-off, getting people scared because, and what's crazy is that if you consider the takeoff for this bull market was March 2020 to February 2021. That was the takeoff. And then we get the first sell-off, the bear trap. But notice, if I've shown you these articles, does it not seem like we're getting more media attention? If we've seen anything, though, we've looked in the past, it seems as if institutional investors have actually exited and caused this dip. So if this is any foreshadowing of what we can expect just based on, the media coming out now and we're getting more positive media attention, the SAFE would obviously allow institutional investors to get right back in. Any sort of news of reform might be enough for institutional investors to want to get back in, but this is where I believe we are based on what we've seen and where we are heading. What do you think? Let me know in the comments, because I think this is a very fascinating chart, but at the same time, this just also highlights what happens and why it's very key, regardless, to make sure you lock in profits up here and have a plan to sell so that you don't kick yourself as we head back into this phase. And I'm not saying this does happen, but this chart clearly does say that this is just how bull markets work. So I just wanted to share this because I thought this was fascinating. What do you think? Let me know, because if we are just in the bear trap and we're going to continue heading up, then what a time to be a cannabis investor. And then I wanted to share this resource from CC Invest, who's another Canadian, I believe, that invests in cannabis, but he has some great resources on the top 4 MSOs, but he's extremely bullish on the top 4 MSOs, much like I am. But what he highlights here is how quarter over quarter their revenue continues to grow, but at the same time, look how much less their operational expenses are growing. Obviously, they are growing because to any sort of business operations likely will cost money, but if you're continuing to grow your revenue this much while not growing your operation expenses and keeping those under control, that is what you love to see out of any sort of a business. So we've got Trulieve right here, Cresco Labs, Curaleaf, and Green Thumb. As they continue to see massive revenue growth, they're keeping their operating expenses fairly low comparatively, especially Trulieve, Cresco, and Green Thumb, but at the same time, Curaleaf, they've got the most revenue growth, but it's because they have to spend the most operationally in their day-to-day business operation. So it's just a cool look to see that, but at the same time, just highlighting that you cannot go wrong with any of the top 4 MSOs. This is not investment advice, though, just providing the education so that you can make the decision for yourself. On to Florida, the Office of Medical Cannabis Use. This is measuring from May 21st to the 27th, and then it's reporting on the 28th what they've seen. So up from last week, which was 561,000, I believe, we're now up to 567,000 patients. So that's an increase of about 5,800 patients, again, in just a week. Seems like one new dispensary opened up. And if we check out the sales, still tons of cannabis was being sold in Florida. Trulieve sold 30.9 thousand ounces of marijuana in the form for smoking, also known as flower. But I just wanted to point out that this measures from May 21st to May 27th. So it appears to go Thursday to Thursday. Now, what these sales don't include are Friday, May 28th, Saturday, May 29th, and Sunday, May 30th, Memorial Day anticipation sales, which we'll actually see next week. So I'll be happy to cover that because I do want to see next week. I'm sure Trulieve is going to sell more than a ton of cannabis again, just in anticipation for that long weekend. But just wanted to point this out. Sales are healthy again, and patient growth is steady in Florida. Think about that. 5,000 people a week is 250,000 people a year, and that's a great pace to be growing at. Now, cannabis MSOs report stellar financials too, as mega mergers could heat up. So as I've been covering all of these financial reports, we've got Curaleaf, Green Thumb, Trulieve, Cresco Labs, Verano. Top tier is likely the least amount of risk. You just choose one of the companies and ride with it. It's like trying to get into the Amazon or McDonald's or Apple of cannabis. Then you've got the second tier ones, which are smaller, but also have potential to grow as well, as long as they continue to execute, cut costs, and their footprint ends up panning out the way that they expected it. All this to say that, yes, U.S. cannabis companies are the best cannabis companies to invest in right now, with the most potential upside because they're much more undervalued than their Canadian peers. But these operators continue to report banner revenue growth in the first 3 months of this year, boosted by good execution and strong consumer demand in established and newer markets. Many report double-digit revenue growth for the first time in 2021 versus the fourth quarter of 2020, and in several cases, staggering year-over-year growth. Gross profit margins improved for most MSOs, ranging from Illinois-based operators Green Thumb Industries and Cresco Labs to smaller operators like TerraSend and Ascend Wellness. But not all MSOs are doing well. Some, such as Los Angeles-based MedMen Enterprises, still struggle with high debt loads and low cash flow as a result of overspending, overly ambitious expansion, and poor execution. In other words, bad management, but that's why I reemphasize that you can reduce your risk of like going for a penny stock, hoping for high risk, high reward sort of thing in gambling, where choosing one of the top tier MSOs is really just a surefire play in the long run. But just wanted to highlight the weak stock prices. We've seen this over time. Why? Well, despite strong first quarter results, U.S. cannabis stock prices have been hammered in recent months. Experts partly blame the weak performance of large Canadian cannabis companies, because remember, when Credit Suisse pulled custodian services on cannabis stocks, a number of large investors in the space investing through Credit Suisse lost their ability to custodian the stocks. Abner Curtin, CEO of Massachusetts-based Ascend Wellness Holdings, told Reuters at this time this led to a significant sell-off, but the stock slide doesn't necessarily reflect woes among U.S. MSOs. According to Emily Paxia, the cannabis industry is well into a new cycle marked by increasing prudence, and this includes more strategic allocation of capital, stronger balance sheets, efforts to lower the cost of capital, a focus on creating shareholder value, but also at the same time the sentiment of cannabis changing more positively, and we're reducing the stigma over time. So all our steps moving toward a lasting industry, Paxia said. That's really the long view of how you build a cannabis company, and that's how you successfully invest in the long run. Now we're going to jump over to Canada. Retail shakeout expected as Ontario heads toward 1,000 cannabis stores. So I've been talking about this a lot. I wasn't expecting a big retail shakeup, but let's see what MJ Biz Daily has to say. Ontario is projected to reach 1,000 licensed cannabis retailers by the end of the summer, actually. So not even just by the end of the year, marking a key growth milestone in Canada's largest provincial cannabis market. That rapid market expansion, however, could lead to a thinning of the herd, with a number of Ontario stores operating, telling MJ Biz Daily they expect a significant shakeout among retailers. Now keep in mind though, Ontario has 14.5 million people, so you need more than 1,000 stores to just effectively supply that demand. So it's interesting to see that they think there's going to be a big shakeup. I don't think so, just because we're really going to see what the power of having legal access points is actually going to bring. But hey, this is the experiment of the summer that we're going to see. Ontario was initially a laggard in cannabis store rollouts, but recently overtook Alberta to become home of the most cannabis retailers of any Canadian jurisdiction, commensurate with the province's population of nearly 15 million. In recent presentation to retailers shared with MJ Biz Daily by an attendee, the Ontario Cannabis Store OCS, a government-owned wholesale monopoly that supplies private retail outlets, said it remains committed to opening 1,000 plus retailers by September 1st, despite the complications of COVID-19 lockdowns. The Alcohol and Gaming Commission of Ontario, the regulator that licenses these stores, confirmed that it anticipates that 1,000 stores will be issued by September 1st, and the Alcohol and Gaming Commission of Ontario website listed more than 760 such authorizations as of Thursday. I would say by the end of summer, you're going to see shops in very saturated environments close down rapidly, said Katy Perry. What? Any relation to the singer? Founder and CEO of Ontario retailer Toke Cannabis. The market's just not big enough to support them. It's just not. Are you sure though? Because like 15 million people, you need at least 1,000 stores. So we're going to see if Katy Perry knows what she's talking about as a small business owner, or whether, Ontario has really just been undersupplied for a long while. There's a lot of people that want to test the waters of cannabis retail, and I think that they're in for a rude awakening. She just doesn't want people to eat into her market share. But sorry, Katie, you jumped in at the same time as everyone else, and you got to open up stores to supply the demand. So this is going to be interesting to see what happens. But on to some developments out of Canada. Hexo has made a move to acquire Redecan for $925 million. So good on Hexo for making this move to stay alive in Canada, because after Aphria and Village Farms International, which for the most part over the last 6 months held the most market share in Ontario. I think Canopy was creeping up there too, but Redecan was the one private company that you could not invest in. Redecan was number 3 in market share, or number 2 even, jumping in between Aphria and Village Farms. So this is good for Hexo to stay alive, but at the same time, $925 million, it's going to cost them money to do so, and let's just take a look at the details of this. $525 million of consideration is through Hexo common shares. So they just diluted their current shareholders by $500,000 in order to buy this company for $1 billion. So again, I would never invest in Hexo just because the management has proven terrible in the past, but this is a big move for them in order to keep up with now the new big giants of Canopy, Tilray, and now which will be Hexo. So let's see what they're getting transaction highlights out of this. Brand leader they will become, as Redecan's product mix and leading market share position across a number of key product categories will complement Hexo's already large suite of sought-after brands across several products and price points. Robust product portfolio. Following the transactions, Hexo will be a Canadian leader in dried flower across premium, mainstream, and value price points. The company will also be the industry leader for cannabis-infused beverages through Trust Beverages, while Redecan's differentiated product portfolio includes top-selling oils and capsules and market leadership in the pre-roll category. Product innovation. The newly combined know-how further enables the development of higher potency and more consistent products and key categories. Accelerated path towards positive earnings per share. Redecan has proven itself capable of consistently delivering on significant EBITDA with low depreciable capital base and zero debt. Best-in-class production capabilities. Redecan brings leading manufacturing, automation, and packaging capabilities, resulting in some of the most consistent, efficiently produced, and innovative products in the industry. Its highly efficient proprietary pre-roll technology has supported some of the highest product grossing margins in the industry. With global growth opportunities to come now that they've become a powerhouse, Hexo aims to leverage Redecan's unique pre-roll product experience in manufacturing and well-known brands to expand market share across Canada and further seize opportunities in the US and Europe. But get this, to buy this company for $925 million, they're diluting shareholders by $500 million. So that just, again, is more money that was created out of nothing, goes to buying this company, which reduces your ownership percentage, though, which kind of sucks if you're a Hexo shareholder. But at the same time, if you wait for Hexo to drop and hit a bottom point and you buy at the bottom, then technically you're getting it at a good time. If the company then, changes their ways, improves their management, and becomes more effective. But clearly, Redecan was the last available steal in the Canadian market, so good on them to pick them up. But just want to highlight this too, as any press release can say this, combined company would hold number 1 market share in Canadian recreational cannabis and hold number 1 positions in 4 of Canada's largest markets: Alberta, British Columbia, Quebec, and Ontario, with a footnote. So let's go to the bottom of the page and see what the footnote means. With that little 1, they can say, source based on Headset recreational market share data from October 1st, 2020 to March 30th, 2021 for October, BC, and Alberta. But I went to headset.io, and I would invite you to go do it if you want. You can go to headset.io and you can check the flower sales or the pre-roll sales or the vape sales for Ontario, Alberta, and BC. And as of right now, Hexo is not in the top 5 for any of them. So although they can say that based on what might have been true from October to March, they're not leading anymore right now. So just keep in mind, any of these press releases, they do contain forward-looking statements to make the company look better. But nonetheless, cool on Hexo to do that so they can compete. And on top of that, 3 Canadian cannabis stocks Wall Street predicts will rally more than 30%, likely only because these companies are able to list on major exchanges and trade on the NASDAQ and the New York Stock Exchanges. And while US MSOs can't, that gives these companies an advantage. And it is, again, the big ones that I often reiterate. I would not recommend Canopy, but Canopy Growth is on this list as they are anticipating US legalization soon. But the other 2 that would be my 2 Canadian choices, if you had to pick, Tilray. Try to get in at the bottom if you can. That way, in the future, you will see a return on your investment if you get in at a low point now. And after Tilray, there's Village Farms International, the only other Canadian LP that is a low-cost producer and with a distribution network in the U.S. and Mexico. I think they definitely have potential to get into the U.S. And be one of the low-cost providers for wholesale when that happens. But again, just wanted to highlight that if you're going to invest in Canada and try to ride the trend, because obviously if US MSOs charge, so will Canadian LPs, but likely going to see more upside if you get into the MSOs, which are more undervalued than the LPs at this point. And lastly, just wanted to highlight from Alfredo Pascual. Love this guy's name. He's the Vice President of Investment Analysis. The German government just published its quarterly update of medical cannabis flower imports for pharmacy dispensing, highlighting that in Q1 2021, the German government imported 3,259 kilograms of cannabis, which doesn't seem like a lot, and it is not compared to what's being consumed in the US or in Canada, but at least in German standards, almost 2 times what they brought in Q1 2020 imports. So the good news is that the amount of cannabis that Germany is importing is increasing over time, so you love to see that for any new market. The first time that in the previous 6 months imports surpassed 6,000 kilograms, so it's great to see that these numbers are increasing. Obviously, once adult use or some sort of recreational program might be introduced into Europe, that's going to accelerate this growth. But at the same time, the medical markets in Europe are limited to what the government is going to allow. And with time and data, governments likely will loosen the regulations, but what this does show us is that the demand for medical cannabis in Germany, the largest market in the EU, is increasing. So that's a great thing to see, and I wanted to end that off with this. But one more article, as Morocco joins the growing list of African countries to legalize cannabis. So great to see that the North African country adopted Wednesday the law authorizing the therapeutic use of cannabis, a major reform for this North African country considered to be one of the first producers of hashish in the world. The legal use means it can only be used in medicine, cosmetics, and even for industrial purposes. However, recreational use remains prohibited. And it's not just Morocco and Malawi like we saw last week, as last year, Rwanda permitted the production and processing of medical cannabis with an aim to maximize its profits. The Rwanda government reiterated that the production and use will only be limited to licensed dealers, like pharmacies, and that cannabis consumption remains illegal. In South Africa, the government is still pursuing plans to ensure that the Southern African economy can maximize on the plant by turning marijuana into a viable business. South Africa is planning to sign the Cannabis for a Private Purpose Bill into law within the 2022-2023 financial year. This came after a landmark ruling by the Constitutional Court in 2018 permitting the use, possession, and cultivation of cannabis in private dwellings was not illegal and should be allowed in South Africa. And the government was given 24 months to enact this law. While in Uganda, they enacted one of the stringent laws to curb the use of cannabis, but at the same time allowed the commercialization of the product. The Ugandan government spent over $264,000 to secure high-quality cannabis seeds in 2019. They also secured buyers from Germany and Canada after getting approval from the EU in 2019. Other countries that have legalized for commercial use and export of cannabis in Africa are Lesotho, Zambia, and Zimbabwe. As they highlight, the cannabis sativa has been proven to have over 50,000, I think that's a typo, 1 extra 0, industrial uses, including as an alternative to paper, cardboard, cotton, and medicinal purposes. Now, where they say cannabis sativa, for industrial purposes, they're talking about hemp, which is the male cannabis plant used for industrial purposes, whereas the female cannabis plant, known as cannabis, is used for medicine, and that's the one that's high in THC. But if you think about that, Africa can become self-reliant if they think ahead and realize that with hemp, you can replace everything that you create with synthetic plastics using natural plastics from the hemp plant. Again, replacing paper with hemp as opposed to cutting down trees. Energy, instead of relying on fossil fuels, you can burn hemp biomass and turn that into clean energy. So tons of potential possibilities. Although this headline is a bit misleading because it says legalize cannabis, they should emphasize the medical or industrial part. But anyways, it's just great that, yes, this is going on in other parts of the world. I didn't realize this many African countries were becoming more cannabis friendly, but you gotta love to see that. And that is it for this week's episode. So I want to thank you all so much for tuning in. Let me know in the comments if you're getting excited and if you think the bull run's going to continue this week after Monday markets open back up. As also on Tuesday, June 1st, Canopy Growth will release their Q1 earnings. So we will get a look at what the former Canadian leader was able to pull off, and that will give us a gauge on how we want to, maybe evaluate the other Canadian LPs, but most definitely the US MSOs, and we might just see how undervalued they really are. So if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like on it. Subscribe below if you don't want to miss any future videos, and I will see you Wednesday for midweek update. Have a great day, everybody.